Okay, so I'm just going to walk through a little bit of a background and a synopsis that was similar to what Roderick talked about at the beginning. I'm going to talk about specifically how EC3 is looking at baselines versus average data for materials per material category. So first of all, just grounding everyone with EC3 and the fact that you can go register and log into the tool yourself. So what you're seeing me do in a minute is going to be what you can also do. Just to start things off, I wanted to talk briefly about, again, the stages of embodied carbon and what to do when. So there are tools that are whole building LCA tools. Those are tools like Tally and others like OneClick and Athena. And we always like to start by just grounding everyone in the fact that EC3 is not a whole building LCA tool. It's not looking at all of the stages of impacts, and it's not looking at all of the greenhouse gas emissions that Roderick mentioned. Tally is looking at using their data sources. So it's a next step once whole building LCA has been completed, where you're looking at systems level comparisons, materials versus each other, or other materials like timber versus steel. And it's really getting into the product level where you're looking at manufacturers of a particular product and then analyzing them against each other to come up with a building based on that data. And really, both of these things I think are necessary, both steps, so that you're optimizing at the front end and really realizing the savings based on procurement of products at the end of the project. The next thing, just to kind of ground everyone, and again, I think is the stages of embodied carbon. Roderick went through this too. This is the World Green Building Council graphic out of their report. And really, all of these have various levels of emissions impacts and available data and data sources. When EC3 was being developed, the choice was to begin with A1 to A3, because generally that is the largest impact when it comes to global warming potential or carbon. And it's what we can get in a way that is, I would put in quotes, aligned in environmental product declarations. So EC3's data and the way we're using the data and displaying it is really this A1 to A3 embodied carbon data. EC3 uses environmental product declarations to come up with our data sets per material category when you're looking at ranges for a building, and also when you're looking at comparisons of products and manufacturers. So just grounding everyone again in EPDs being basically an environmental impact nutrition label for a material that's giving you all of the impacts that are in a whole building LCA analysis when it comes to other greenhouse gas impacts and things like water use and energy use. But we are keenly looking at the serving size, which is the declared unit of materials, and the carbohydrates, which are the kilograms of CO2 per declared unit. That's really what EC3 is pulling out. And then what EC3 is doing is taking material quantities, just like we would in a cost estimate, and multiplying those by kilograms of CO2 per unit versus cost per unit. And that gives you an embodied carbon estimate for the materials included. And now I just really want to, these are the slides I told you I included today when I was thinking about this. So I really want to talk a little bit about embodied carbon baselines versus industry average or average data. And I'm going to put this in an analogy from a book that my son loved to read when he was a little younger called Shark versus Train. Who will win? Baselines versus averages. Who will win? I think that it depends on what you're trying to do. Both have their strengths and weaknesses. Some are better. Sometimes baselines are better if you're trying to set up something to track against or set a target against. And sometimes averages are better if you're trying to find a proxy for something. In a tool like Tally, for instance, where you're at the early stages of a project, those averages are good because they're giving you a proxy for a whole material category, for instance. And also, neither are perfect, so that's okay. We are doing the best that we can with the data we have, and as we continue to establish baselines, understand baselines, establish averages, understand averages, get more data, they will improve. So we just all have to acknowledge the fact that we are dealing with imperfection right now, and we're dealing with lack of data in some cases, lack of transparency in others. So just sit with the fact that it's okay that things aren't perfect, and we're going to move forward and just continue to work with what we have. The next is, I think, similar to what you've seen. I just pulled the Merriam-Webster definitions for baseline and average. So a baseline is a line serving as a basis, a boundary line at either end, a high or a low, usually an initial set of critical observations or data that are used for comparison or control, and a starting point. And that's really how we've approached the baselines in EC3. An average is a value that represents the general significance of a set of unequal values. So again, if we've got a whole bunch of different manufacturers creating materials that are all over the place when it comes to emissions with varied alignment in the data, the average is meant to create a line that is representative of the average of those things. So again, just to kind of ground everyone in the differences and what baselines versus averages are really meant to be used for. The other thing to think about with baselines and the way that we're thinking about this with EC3 and how we're setting them up for products and then rolling it up to a building is how ASHRAE, if you think about ASHRAE, was established and improved over time as efficiencies got better in buildings, as building design got better in terms of optimizing energy use, the baseline was updated. So it's okay if baselines change. They just need to be changed in a way that's open and transparent and understandable. And that's a mark of where the industry is or where a certain application is for that baseline. So I think we map our thinking about baselines when it comes to embodied carbon and materials emissions similar to ASHRAE on the energy side. I'm going to go ahead and go in the tool just to do this live and then go back to my slides. So if I log in to EC3 from my public account, my Lady Gaga at buildingtransparency.org address, where I'm just an ordinary user seeing just the normal tool, you'll see here there's the materials that are currently included. If I go back and I log in as my executive Stacy curator account, what you're going to see is that I just want everyone to understand that we are working on more material categories. So there's a whole bunch of stuff coming when it comes to what will be in the tool from a product perspective. These are actually already populated with all the EPDs. The reason they're still in pilot is because we are right now setting the baselines for those categories. So what you're going to see me show you today for the categories that are public is the process we're now going through with the pilot materials so that we can publish those in the public version. So if I go to concrete and ready mix, I'm just going to go ahead and click search and get all the concrete EPDs that we have in the database to kind of demonstrate this. What you're going to see in the results, if I scroll down first, is how many EPDs we have. So we're pulling data from over 21,000 mix-specific EPDs, and we're pulling out the kilograms of CO2 and all the other information out of the EPDs. What that's doing for every search that you do, whatever you do filter and sort for, and whatever results are returned, is giving you the box plot diagram where it's going to give you the maximum of all the EPDs, the minimum of all the EPDs, the CLF baseline, which I'll show you in just a minute, and then this kind of conservative achievable range. And that's really the 80th percentile at the top, so 20% above what we consider conservative. There's still 20% products that are higher, and then 20% below the achievable. So that's achievable because there's still 20% of the current supply chain in the tool that's below that achievable mark. The CLF baselines are important. If you scroll over this in the tool, it'll give you what that number is. And if you click on it, it will actually take you to the baseline document and open it up for you in a separate tab. So if you're ever looking for that reference document, just clicking on that line in EC3 will take you to it. It's on the CLF website. You can in fact dig into the website to find it. So I always just click on it in the tool. And what you're going to see here if I scroll down is just kind of the methodology of how these were established, as well as I go down, the table. So this is going to give you the table of the CLF baselines, where the data is being pulled from, and how they've been set. We are updating this to have the units in both imperial and metric, so it's a little easier to translate. But this is the document that the lead pilot credit is referencing when it comes to the construction procurement credit that's in version 4.1, as well as what the EC3 tool is using. And what I'll say about this is that the whole point is to create high conservative baselines to incentivize disclosure and allow reduction targets to be set. So the idea is not to create a line that's average, it's a line that remains static and that is conservative or high to incentivize disclosure and allow most manufacturers to actually be under this line, so baselines can be set or reductions can be set against that line, and actual disclosure is incentivized. We don't want guys to be above the line so much they're not going to give us their data right now. If I click the compare manufacturers button, what you're going to see is all of the different manufacturers of concrete, and this is for the whole database right now, but you could dial this down to just a place. So I just want to ground anyone that the slides I'm about to show you are me just going into this filtering by certain locations, and then clicking this compare button to get all of the data for each manufacturer. You'll see they get their own box plot with a low and a high and a range, so you can directionally see how they compare to each other. What I've done for this presentation, which was really actually an interesting exercise even for me, was to take those comparisons. I used the NRMCA regions where they've got the benchmarking data for concrete, and start to look at where the CLF baseline is against the NRMCA regional benchmark and industry average, and how that's playing out among the suppliers that are now disclosing. What's interesting, again, for the fact that this is not perfect, if you start to go through each region, you'll see that, you know, based on the supplier data and where they are actually coming in now, that we're actually getting data from different markets that's product specific. Sometimes the industry averages and the benchmarks are really good and are representative of the whole. The benchmark is high. In other cases, the baseline's high. In other cases, the baseline's not even high enough for that particular that place, and the average or benchmark might be low. So again, as we get more data and as this becomes more robust from a product-specific emissions standpoint, we can start to update these things and actually provide insight into how they move and what they actually should be. So again, just going through the different regions. I want to move kind of quickly because I've done this for all of the different public materials, and it's interesting. So here's rebar, for instance, and I talked to Kate Simonin about this morning when I saw the results and started to do this. And the reason this baseline is so high is it's trying to account for non-US rebar. So accounting for the fact that if we got our rebar from overseas, it would be up towards that conservative level. And we want to give credit and show and demonstrate that US rebar and even location-specific rebar is performing better than that. So you'll see for rebar, this is what you're seeing. But then there's this guy in Utah that all of a sudden is way up there. So do we need regional baselines? How can we actually start to use this data now that more folks are disclosing to update this information? Moving into other categories like hot rolled steel, again, there's a conservative baseline that's high to represent a global baseline, and where different products are coming in. You can see there are some here that are coming in from Europe and Turkey even. So does this baseline need to move down? Maybe. And then looking at things like metal framing, here's one where the baseline might need to move up now that we're getting more disclosure. You'll also see that we've got folks that are using national averages for all their plants and some that are actually plant specific. And what does that mean? Because these guys have plants all over the country. So what would this look like if they all of a sudden had the next layer of detail in their EPDs? Here's looking at what we have right now for engineered timber. So we've got some LVL, some TFL, some CLT. We have only an industry average for LSL, and that's what I'm showing here because it's the only one I have that could be applicable. And then you can see that conservative baseline again. Again, for softwood lumber, we don't have a lot of data that's product specific. We have the industry average and we have the baseline. And so we need more data to understand if those are really where they should be. For GWB, it looks like we're doing pretty well. The industry average and might be a little high. And then for carpet and ceiling tiles, we don't have an industry average, we just have the baseline, and we're seeing how that kind of now spreads across all of these manufacturers. So just grounding everyone in how the baselines are currently, where they are currently in EC3, understanding that as we get more products in the tool, we might actually need to update these just like we would update an ASHRAE standard. But starting with some line in the sand so that people can actually start to look at the project level or the product level to set limits and targets or reductions. On their ceiling panels, again, same thing, no industry average, just our baseline. So if I go back into EC3 now, again, the way you can use the tool in general is to set maximum and minimums regardless of a baseline, just using the data. If you want to start to look at that from a product level or a concrete supplier or mix level. The other thing in the tool that baselines are used for is when you get to the project planner and you start to do that quantity times material embodied carbon estimate, that's actually what the tool is using as its high baselines as the starting point. So I'm going to open up my son's project that he did for his homework assignment a month or so ago, because it's a simple one. This is our underground lair for our pug chuck. It's a substructure, it's a basement building because it's underground. But you can see here we put in our quantities. You go in and do your search. He's searched by radius from his project site. And then he's actually also selected the actual EPD for each product. So he's done all that in the tool. And what happens, you get to the ability to first, even before you've selected products, if you've just kind of used the collection of data for a particular search, like a 100-mile radius of all the concrete suppliers for something, it will give you that high baseline and then the potential reduction to that 20th percentile for your project based on your quantities. So you're seeing here the relative impact of concrete versus rebar versus all these other materials, using that baseline data and showing the reduction based on the supply chain data in the tool. That rolls up to an actual overall building reduction against the baseline. Again, this baseline is high, and that reduction potential might change based on where you are in the country, if you're sourcing materials that are going to go up or down. If you're in Utah and you're using that high rebar guy, or you're in a market where the concrete emissions are a little higher based on efficiencies or optimization in the EPDs, this number will change based on that achievable target for your searches. Once you've selected products, what you can do is then go into the selected versus baseline diagram, where you're going to see, again, the CLF baseline roll up for the building, the achievable that you could have done based on the 20th percentile of the data, and your realized savings based on the EPDs selected. And this is really where, at the end of the project, if you're trying to look at, realized savings, you can see it from a kilograms of CO2 square foot perspective for your building and for each product type. And you can also see a reduction against the baseline. This baseline and these material categories are what are mapped to the LEED pilot credit. So if you do after the pilot credit, you can use EC3 to quantify the material categories for that construction pilot credit, show your realized savings, and it's a 30% reduction per 2 innovation points. We're working on an export button right now that actually exports all of this in a platform that would work for LEED upload. The other thing that you can do, I think that I saw even in the comments, is when you're under to set baselines for project types. If you wanted to use EC3, that is something that's possible by building multiple buildings. This could be 3 buildings of the same type or 3 options for a building. An example that has happened at Skanska is we have 4 different options for a concrete steel structure. We're costing those options in late DD. They're all the same materials, it's just different designs of those concrete steel options. We can then look at cost and carbon emissions next to each other. What this looks like, sorry about that, I clicked the wrong button. What this looks like when you do it on EC3 is the ability to click on these little guys once you've built all 3 of them and click on compare buildings. It will give you all the buildings next to each other, how different they are from an emissions perspective, what that kilograms of CO2 per square foot looks like. You can view that by category to really understand, these are like buildings, they're made out of the same things, and there's this much difference being demonstrated at this time. So maybe that 25 kilograms of CO2 is a good starting point as your benchmark, or if you've realized the savings, you can actually see the realized savings in these projects. We haven't done that on this yet, to actually start to set, project or company benchmarks per project type once you built up your database. The other thing I wanted to remind everyone, I think that the ILFI 500 kilograms of CO2 per square meter number was brought up. Where that came from was that very early embodied carbon benchmarking study that Skanska helped support at the Carbon Leadership Forum, just to start to get to some idea based on carbon footprints that we could put into a database, what those ranges look like. And you can see that, looking at the different product types and the data, project types and the data that was available, that 500 kilograms mark seemed reasonable as a starting point. So that's really where I think that came from the ILFI perspective. And with that, I will stop sharing.
Hey, Stacy, a question for you.
Sure.
Did you cover that EC3 modifies the global warming potential data from the EPD into the tool?
Sure.
I think that was really fascinating to me, to kind of make them more comparative or easier.
Yeah, so if I go into, I'll use concrete because we have a really good story of actually how this is doing what we had hoped it would do. So if I go into a concrete search and I just click on one of these EPDs, what it's going to tell you and show you is all the information we could pull out of the EPD, and then it's going to tell you some interesting facts. So you'll see this blue squishy stuff, which is the term that I've now coined for what we're calling variability on an EPD declared number. And you'll see that we've got the declared number there. This blue squishy stuff is tied directly to how we analyze the specificity and actual reality of the data. So when you're looking at EPDs, some EPDs can just be manufacturer specific for multiple products. Some can be product specific for multiple plants. some can be plant specific, and then the next step is supply chain specific. So for concrete, for instance, if we just had a plant specific or a product specific concrete EPD, which wouldn't really work. If we unclicked any of these boxes, that blue squishy stuff gets bigger because we have less assurance of the quality of the data. Right now for concrete, what's left right here is cement. We don't have supply chain specific data for cement. If the cement plants would actually start making plant-specific EPDs, concrete suppliers would see their variability in EC3 go down to almost 0 because of the impact of that supply chain-specific data for cement. We now have 3 cement suppliers that are getting plant-specific EPDs for their cement based on concrete suppliers wanting their variability to go away in EC3. So again, this is to daylight to everyone that per material category, there is variability in the data, and we need to look at it directionally, which is why we show everything directionally when we're looking at the comparisons with those kind of box plots, and then really understand where we need to get to more alignment in the data through PCR updates, through more specific data further down the supply chain, and really get to a point where there isn't any blue squishy stuff. Again, back to my point, we can't wait till things are perfect. We need to disclose where we are and really work to make the data better.